Who we're going way outside the box on this one. Armor class is a very big term in tabletop role-playing games. Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder both use armor class. I am taking it out, that word, entirely. And I'm replacing it with something that sounds better and makes more sense and mechanically is more applicable. Hey there, I'm the Dungeon Coach, professional game designer of DC20 RPG, a new tabletop roleplay game that's hitting the scene real soon. This is the first time I'm revealing how defense and armor works in this game, and there are definitely things you can take and steal and different nuggets here that you could definitely apply to D&D, Pathfinder, and beyond. First, we're going to talk about the word armor class and why it doesn't make sense from a game design perspective. Then we're going to add a new type of armor class to the game, and then see why you might like some of these changes and what it would actually mean and how it would play. So the first point here is really a small one in the big picture of things, is the word armor class. I don't think it's a good word, because what does armor class mean? Like the class of your armor, like the class, like how good it is, like, you know, I don't think that's very intuitive, because in these games, Pathfinder and D&D and all these other, class already means something. From a game design perspective, when you're creating a game, you give words to things and those words matter. Kind of like in the English language, the word right could be used to say correct, and the word right also could be to turn right, which can lead to some confusing things. So why would you say armor class whenever the word class obviously already means a person's class they've chosen, like druid, fighter, barbarian? Those are classes. So an armor class, I just don't think you should use the same word. And if you had a brand new player that's never played a TTRPG, because I think that all TTRPGs should be user-friendly in that way and kind of be able to bring people in, unless you're really trying to want to have some niche pocket of players only. I think it should be open to multiple people. And if I said, what's your armor class? Or your armor class represents armor class, I don't think is very intuitive. And thirdly, the word armor also represents armor, so then it has limited applications towards what I'm about to say, because in DC20 I am changing the word armor class to defense. But, and here's where the limited applications thing I'm saying comes in, there are two types of defense. There are physical defense and mental defense. Those two words are very intuitive. Physical defense being anything you're protecting yourself from, where armor and shields and physical things could help deflect it in some way. And then other damage, which now you can maybe get your mind going here, other damage that would not affect how much armor or shields you have, things like radiant, holy damage, mentally being attacked psychically. And now you have two different types of armor class, which we're going to call that defense now, of physical defense and mental defense. To show what I'm talking about here before I can blow your mind with some of the other stuff of how the game might change when you do this, here is an excerpt from the alpha of DC20 RPG. Physical defense, or PD, represents the difficulty of hitting a creature with natural sources of damage that affect the body. Now you can see I listed off here the natural sources of damage, and stay here. I'm going to show you the mental defense thing here in a second. You'll see the big picture. But acid is natural, fire natural, you get the idea. Swords, obviously, bludgeoning, piercing, slashing, that's all obvious. But if you are wearing a shield and armor in some way, and if you were, and the best way to think of it, I would say, is if armor of some kind or dodging and moving around it in some way would help with it, that is going to kind of be something that is physical defense. The example here is being hit by a weapon, burned by a fireball, or poisoned by a toxin. So if a wizard shoots a little firebolt at you, he is rolling to try and hit your physical defense, and if you have a warrior trying to wield a sword and hit you, they are rolling to attack your physical defense in the same way. Shield to block a little bit of the firebolt or deflect the sword. Mental defense represents the difficulty of hitting a creature with supernatural sources of damage that affect the mind or soul. Here's a much smaller list of damage, and you'll see why. Force damage, holy damage, unholy damage, which is basically DC20's version of radiant and necrotic. I personally think holy and unholy kind of fits that theme a little bit better, because necrotic doesn't always elicit for me unholy evil, but anyway. And then psychic damage, of course, because I don't care how much armor you're wearing and how big of a helmet you're wearing, if you get your mind assaulted by some sort of psychic attack, it doesn't matter, because that attack would target your mental defense. So the example here is a psychic assault on your mind, like I just said, seared by divine light or withered away with unholy magic. Because now to go back to D&D and Pathfinder for a second, is there's a weird spot that happens when there's a psychic effect that you have to deal damage for. You can't have it target the armor class. They can't make an attack roll to target the armor class because they're trying to do a psychic attack. So then through the mechanics of those games, you have to have it be a save. So now the player doesn't roll any dice. And I don't like that. I don't like that in general. If I have a scion that's trying to assault the mind of that target, I want them to roll a d20, make an attack roll of some kind that's Ooh, but what would I be targeting? In D&D, you can't do that. It's not, you can't target someone's mental armor class, right? Because that's not a thing. I think it very much makes sense for it to be a thing. How well you're protected mentally. Having a high intelligence charisma would give you more mental defense. We'll get into how that's calculated here in a second. Like where mental defense and the physical defense come from, but one second. So those types of spells have to be a saving throw. So you make an intelligence saving throw against them, which then sure, now that's they're rolling for their intelligence save, but then it always feels bad as a dungeon master. A player says that they do some sort of attack. They say they do something, they roll a dice, and then I say, oh, sorry, I got a 24. In general, I just believe at a game design level, if players are trying to deal damage, they should be the ones rolling the D20 to try and attack and deal damage. So having a mental defense and a physical defense solves that problem. Now stay tuned, because in a video about 2 weeks from now, I'm going to post a dynamic attack save system from DC20 on how damage and effects work. And I also been doing these in live streams. You can check out a whole bunch of these rules that I reveal on live streams and on my Patreon. And that's a perfect segue, honestly, of this entire game is supported from my patrons. This would not be possible for me to come in here and start working and developing on this system without patrons. The support you guys have given this system has blown me away, and how much excitement that there's brewing for this whole thing. And I'm just going to keep sharing more and more of these different ideas. And if you do want to support the system, you can join on there. I am releasing the alpha very soon. By the time this video comes out, it would be weeks away from me releasing the alpha, and that goes to certain reward tiers. And then over time, as I release more and more, it goes to eventually all patrons will be able to get access into the beta and stuff like that as this whole thing unfolds. But if you're still on the fence of this whole thing, or you really just want to kind of stay in tune, I do live streams and multiple videos like I've been showing on DC20 RPG. But now back to the defense examples here. So if you have a spell, there's a weird spot of a spell like a necrotic touch or some sort of a necrotic erosion that has a range of touch or whatever like that, and you have to make a spell attack roll and it's targeting their armor class. So now this withering erosion of someone's like, right? Now it's changed based on their armor, which wouldn't necessarily be true unless you're flavoring it that they have to touch their skin or something, and then the armor would block that. So having a high armor class would represent that. And then there's also the whole gameplay mechanic of if a character has a very high armor class, now you have to get spells that target saves, and then you have to only use spells against them that target certain saves and stuff like that. But now if you have physical and mental defense, you could have a enemy on the battlefield or a player character have a high physical defense, but maybe their mental defense is a little low, and now things that target that would be very scary. And if you truly wanted to be a tank, you would be able to get things that have a higher mental defense and a higher physical defense, or maybe you go 50-50, or maybe your casters have a really high mental defense because they're very good, which also makes sense because they probably have high intelligence, charisma, whatever, and they have a high mental defense and they're better able to ward off certain type of magical assault. It just gives a really cool dynamic, honestly, to defense in general, and having the physical and mental split, and a lot of the other stuff I want to get into about attack rolls and having players roll these attack rolls. Don't worry, Dungeon Masters, you're still rolling dice too, because you're making attacks against people's mental defense or physical defense, whatever. Now, for those of you who stuck around and listen to all this defense talk and you want to see kind of like how this works mechanically in DC20 RPG, I've had many videos about different parts of this, what some of these other stats are, and all these different types of things. So if you want to check those out, let me know, or join a live stream, ask questions. I answer questions all the time about this system. So here's the physical defense formula and how it works. You start off, every character, all player characters start off with a base physical defense of 8. So a regular commoner will have a base physical defense of 8. Then everybody adds their combat mastery, and in DC20, combat mastery is half your level, which scales over time, which is great because I think that's one, Pathfinder does a good job of it as far as scaling. D&D though, your armor class, if you wear a certain suit of armor and you have this great suit of armor on, it just gives you an armor class, and then maybe adds your dexterity or not to it, and that's it. And you just have that armor class. And if you wear it as a level 2 versus a level 20, it's the same, which I don't like that at all. So you have your base of 8 plus your combat mastery, which is half your level. So if you're level 10, you add a +5. If you're level 4, you add a +2. And then you add your attribute score. This attribute depends on what kind of armor you're wearing. The attribute you use for light armor is different than what you'd use for heavy armor. Because if you're using light, which are the only 2 types of armor in the game also, by the way, there's light armor and heavy armor. There's multiple different kinds of it, but those are the 2 categories of armor. Light armor, you would use, guess what? Agility, which is dexterity in D&D. It's the same type of conversion. So your agility attribute is what you would add to your armor while wearing light, mobile type of armor. And if you're wearing heavier type of armor, you are not going to be trying to tiptoe and dodge around things. You are wearing heavy armor. So your attribute you add to this armor is, you probably guessed it, your might attribute, or strength if you want to call it strength from the other games. But there's the big picture of 8 as a base, plus your combat mastery of however high of a level you are, right? Which is going to be half your level, like I said. Then you have your attribute bonus of agility if you're using light armor, or might if you're using heavy armor. And you can kind of see how that really scales. It gives a solid base of 8, scales with the level, and then also is impacted by how good your character is at a certain attribute and how many points you put into that attribute. And then before I forget, there is an armor bonus. Depends on what armor you're wearing. Like I said, there's multiple different kinds of light armor and heavy armor. If the armor has a bonus, you also add that, of course. +1, +2, +3. It'll be depending on the armor. And a quick little timeout for me to talk about damage reduction, because I love damage reduction in DC20. It's not a thing. I have a whole damage reduction system that I proposed and put out there for Alexander's Almanac of all things. There's a hardcore armor system that is in that if you want to use that for D&D. But for DC20, there is damage reduction, and it takes a little bit of edge off of the hits you take. It minuses off of that. But if you get hit hard enough, it bypasses the damage reduction. So if you get hit like normal, it does reduce the damage you take by a certain amount. So if you have a damage reduction of 2, it minuses 2 off of each hit you take. Super simple. And if you get hit really hard, like a really high attack roll, and you get hit really hard, it bypasses damage reduction. So another cool little thing to put in there. But what about mental defense? Mental defense works in almost the same way, because in DC20, I want things to mirror each other and be very intuitive and just make sense. So your mental defense formula starts off with the same base of 8. You have a base of 8 to be able to, your mind's protection from magical energies and whatnot, right? Base of 8. And then you add, guess what? Your combat mastery. Yes, half your level, you add your combat mastery, just like before. As you see, this is very similar. And then you add your mental attribute scores. The mental attribute scores are intelligence and charisma. You add both of them. Intelligence and charisma are the 2 mental stats, because in DC20 there are 4 stats: might and agility, intelligence and charisma. So you take those 2 mental stats and you add them to your mental defense. So if you take intelligence or charisma as a dump stat, sure, you totally can do that. You're going to have a low mental defense, which also kind of makes sense and kind of well rounds and balances out some things. You can have a high intelligence, low charisma, or vice versa, and have a decent score. But man, oh man, if you have a base of 8, combat mastery obviously scales with level. And if you have a high intelligence and charisma, mentally strong. And that's it. That is defense in a nutshell for this whole system. And man, oh man, I can't wait to those of you that have seen the full system and seen how dynamic attack save works, see how attack damage rolls are made, heavy hits, brutal hits, exceeding defense by 5, 10, 15, adding more damage, how all these different parts of the systems combine together. I think you're gonna love it. If you do, I want to hear it down in the comments. Share this video out there. Help spread the word of DC20. I would massively appreciate it. And if you want to go the extra mile and support over on Patreon, I'd appreciate that too. So stay creative, think outside the box. Peace.